Is Michigan in some dire trouble when it comes to this season? It is certainly possible. So in order to kind of delve a little bit more deeply into where Michigan is at the moment, how potentially dire things are, it's more than just a 4-3 season at this point, especially when you look at the back end of the schedule. Bringing on Steve Deace, who has some really good insights into where Michigan stands at the moment and where it can go, not just this year, but in the future. We're going to talk about it on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, where it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Another day of not being on the ground, so I'm bringing in a little bit of help, especially since I can't talk. And bringing in Steve Deace, host of Michigan Podcast, because Steve had some really interesting analysis that he sent me earlier today. Before we kind of get into that, Steve, I just kind of want to get into your thoughts on where Michigan stands this season so far. Obviously, 3 quarterbacks. You never want to see that. Jack Tuttle maybe struggling more than either of the other two so far. What do you make of that? What should Michigan be doing, in your opinion? And what can they do this season to kind of turn things around a little bit, if they can at all?
Isaiah, I have to tell you, I think it's the worst coached Michigan football team I've seen in 41 years as a fan, which blows my mind. Would have never guessed that going into the year. And it's the worst offense that has been exhibited in the Big Ten since the Chris Ash era Rutgers offenses with Arthur Sitkowski at quarterback, when one year he finished 14th in quarterback efficiency in a league that at the time only had 12 programs, okay, which meant that he finished behind 2 other teams' second-string quarterbacks. It's a high school offense. It doesn't even really attempt to maximize its personnel advantages. Doesn't really even attempt to put any form of stress on an offense or on an opposing defense at all. That's a Freudian slip. Instead, it puts stress on its own self. I don't understand really what they're trying to do. I was talking to a friend of mine today who helps to raise a considerable amount of money for Michigan athletics. And he asked me point blank, he said, what are we trying to do? And I have to tell you, as a guy that has covered the sport professionally for many years and has watched it so much as a fan that I wish I'd have gotten paid. I'd have made even more than I did covering it professionally. I watch it so much for free. I don't know. At my best guess is that they just from the beginning either didn't understand the team they had or didn't want to coach the team that they had. And I've seen that before. And you can see that right away in the first couple of games, the amount of straight dropbacks that were run with Davis Warren, who had played really no competitive football since the 10th, 11th grade, something like that, because of cancer, rather than play action and making that a staple. Remember, going into last year, the biggest criticism of J.J. McCarthy is that all his passing success was in play action in 2022 and not as a straight drop-back quarterback. It almost seemed to me like they tried to shoehorn a scheme that did not fit the talent. I mean, even last week against Illinois, they had to wait until their backs were against the wall before they finally built an offense around clearly their best overall offensive player in Khalil Mullings. It doesn't make any sense. It reeks of arrogance of young coaches. We know better. We're going to do this our way. We're going to show recruits that this is a new Michigan, and we want those big wide receiver commits like an Andrew Marsh and a Derek Meadows, and we want those Bryce Underwoods and Brady Harts to look differently at Michigan than they did before. And that's all well and good, brothers, but you got to win enough games to get to coach those kids. And I think people have no idea, and a lot of it is their own fault, or not their fault, because we're in a new paradigm of college sports now, Isaiah. And I think you kind of saw, for example, during the basketball search, a different Ward Manual than we had seen at any other point, a different level of aggression. And you know, I'll trust reporting from people that you know even better than me, like Chris Ballas, that Dusty made it known that he wanted Michigan over Louisville from the beginning. But, you know, you actually had to still go get that guy. You had to still go close that sale. Ward Manuel did that. He did display a level of aggression we have not seen from him in the past. So that's an action of someone who recognizes a paradigm shift. And pretty soon, Ward Manuel is going to be signing those checks, brother, to the players with the house settlement. They're going to come out of his payroll. And when you have your own payroll to meet and you're not taking money from somebody else to do so, you look at things a little bit differently. And if we were sitting here on January 23rd, talk of firing Juwan Howard just a couple of months after he had heart surgery would have seemed nuts. But by the time we got to March 23rd and the trajectory of the season was known, it wasn't nuts but necessary. And I think the odds that Sherrone Moore will not survive past this year are way higher than I think a lot of people want to admit. I want to be wrong. I like Sherrone a lot. I think he has a commanding presence, and I think the fact that he's able to get some of these big-time commits with no track record as a head coach indicates that. But he is hanging by a very thin thread right now with this fan base. You lose that game Saturday night to a rebuilding Michigan State. And by the way, Bo lost in his first year to Michigan State. Mo lost in his first year to Michigan State. Lloyd lost in his first year to Michigan State. Rich Rod did. Brady did. Jimmy did. Okay, so there's a trend line of first-year Michigan coaches losing to Michigan State. But you lose that game to that team that's clearly in rebuilding mode that you just beat 49-0 last year. And then you got the number one team in the country coming in the following week. You've got Ryan Day, who may actually be able to hang 100 on this. And there's no COVID. There's no COVID Dunkirk this time, brother. There's no way out of playing that matchup. Yeah, it looks crazy now, probably. But add the baggage of all those things, Isaiah, that I just talked about, and ask yourself, what is the selling point for doing this again? What is the selling point to donors? And we can get into that if you want, but the Michigan donor culture is not used to paying players directly. And so based on what? The evaluation of coaches who clearly didn't know for 9 months they didn't have a playable quarterback. And despite the fact Jack Tuttle and Jaden Denegal and Alex Orji and Davis Warren had been in your program multiple years, you couldn't develop those guys to even be serviceable. I mean, I think there's a lot here on the table and a lot of instability that we are faced with right now. And the program and Sherrone could really need a win Saturday by any means necessary. I don't freaking care if the score's 3-2 and there's a Zaveda field goal to overcome a Michigan State safety at the buzzer. They need to win this game. If not, then there is a real possibility a month from now you're having conversations on your podcast here that would have been unthinkable at the start of the season.
Yeah, one thing I do want to point out just to kind of save my own hide, because I got a comment yesterday. And we can talk about this on the other end of the break, but I got a comment yesterday saying that I clearly don't know football because Michigan, threw for yards last week because they were behind. And that is accurate. That's how I was just surprised that they had 208 yards passing, but they came out to your point and was my point in the last really outside of the USC game and even Minnesota to some degree. They came out saying, we are going to throw the ball and we're going to do it more than we did with J.J. McCarthy. And they did it right out the gates. This wasn't something that they waited to do. Hey, we're down 2-3 scores. We need to start doing it. It was a situation where they said, we're just going to start doing it right away. We're going to start trying to toss the rock through the air. And that is coaching malpractice in my eyes, just kind of given the team that they have. So that is a problem. I'm going to pose a couple different questions to you, but I do want you to go a little bit more here in a few moments on the train of thought about the donor class and what it's going to mean for Michigan. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals like that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. That's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier and even faster. They even just created a new feature that helps you write job descriptions, making everything that much more streamlined. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Steve, I do want to get into, this was kind of what you said to me, which prompted me to have you on the show, aside from the fact that I don't have a working voice box at the moment. You had sent me a message talking about the donor class, and you just touched on it briefly there. Why is it a big deal in your eyes? The fact that Michigan's coaching staff, they have to try to sell players, sell like, hey, you're going to pay the players, but they can't sell themselves as being successful coaches. Why is that a big deal when it comes to the current market as it exists in college football at the moment?
So I wouldn't say I'm a prolific fundraiser by any means, but I have raised over the course of my career millions of dollars. And I can just tell you that people want to invest in things that have track records. And this doesn't have a track record right now. And we have a donor culture disadvantage. Our donor class here, with these massive land-grant universities, with these huge alumni bases here in the Big Ten, and Michigan, of course, has maybe the largest alumni base in the world. It dwarfs the donor base that the Southern schools have. Dwarfs. I mean, a lot of the Southern schools are guys that own chains of car lots and restaurants. We're not dealing with global tycoons like a Stephen Ross kind of has. Okay, so the revenue is there, but the culture isn't. And this is different than I donate to an esteemed university. I get a nice tax deduction. A building is named after me for posterity, and my grandkids and kids and their kids can go and see it long after I'm gone. And it's a respectable transaction. This is wildcatting. And the donors in the South for a generation are used to paying players. And they're used to that being a flighty experience. We're dealing now to throw in, high school kids. We're talking 16 to 22-year-olds. And I mean, I don't know what you were like, but I was a heck of a lot different at 22 than I was at 16. And on a given week-to-week basis, I might be in a different place at 21 and 22. I mean, so they're used to the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows. And you're not investing in Amazon and Disney and General Electric and AT&T now. I mean, these are all startups. And some have better options and P&L statements and reports and projections than others, but they're all startups. And now asking those same donors to give to the players, not get a tax deduction, and then trust the evaluations of coaches. I give them a pass on the transfer portal thing. I follow that very closely. Everybody brings up Curtis Rourke. He committed to Indiana on December the 28th. We hadn't even played the Rose Bowl yet, let alone know that Jimmy wasn't going to be here, okay? I give them a pass on that. I don't know that it was necessarily, there was much they could have done. But I don't give them a pass on, you had these three guys in your program for 9 months, and this is the best development you can do. Not to mention, all three of these guys have been here, Isaiah, multiple years. This is the third off season, for at least for all of them. Some of them, it's their fourth. So what in the world how, and if you thought that that's what you had, then you've got to go to the portal and make something happen. You got to look at Notre Dame's spring game and see they had 3 quarterbacks there better than anybody we have, and tamper with one of them and get him in the portal. I mean, like Nick Saban said on draft night, hey, we tried to get that Toledo corner in the portal at Alabama, but he wouldn't go. I mean, that's the game. That's what we're playing. I mean, it is coaching malfeasance that you either didn't, there's no excuse here. You either didn't know, that's incompetence, or you did know and didn't act and thought you could fix it, that's arrogance, whichever it is, that this is the product. It's embarrassing to watch. It's not bad, it's worse. It's embarrassing. I listened to the postgame show with Anthony Broome and Ryan Van Bergen for the Wolverine the other day. And I know you know those guys really well. And Anthony Broome is asking Ryan Van Bergen how many games we can win. And Van Bergen's like, and he played on some bad Michigan teams, by the way. He played in the Rich Rod era. He's like, hey, man, I don't know how many freaking touchdowns we're going to score. This is embarrassing. And so we have a coach with no track record. We're going to ask donors to invest in players based on his evaluations. That's a tough call, man. That doesn't even count on those players now saying, I will trust that you can develop me. I'm telling you right now, if I'm Jaden Davis's parents, no way I'm letting him play. Yeah, you haven't figured out your offensive line. You have some of the worst pass protection in college football. I can't trust you to develop my guy. And I heard your podcast yesterday about Bryce Young, and I agree. But there comes a point in time where you've now got to pay so much more money than everybody else does, because you don't bring to the track. He doesn't bring the track record to the table. Brian Kelly does, developing Jaden Daniels, who was Jaden Daniels. His players at Arizona State, they celebrated when he left. Now he's maybe an MVP candidate, let alone Rookie of the Year in the NFL, and won the Heisman. You don't have that track record. And I think we need to start considering that Michigan didn't develop J.J. McCarthy as much as he developed Michigan. As much as they realized, crap, man, this kid can do way more than our other guys. Let's open it up and do some stuff. Even then, they still weren't throwing the ball the way they threw it against Illinois last week. And that's a game that they were in most of the way. How about you take the 73rd ranked rush defense and make them prove they can stop Khalil Mullings 25 times before you put the freaking games in the game in the hands of a guy who had no spring practice throwing the ball, barely any fall practice throwing the ball. And so I don't want these things to be true. You know, I enjoyed going to the Rose Bowl with my family last year, but I as everybody else did. And I'm only starting to melt down even after saying I didn't care what our record was, because I never envisioned that we'd have a season where the bottom of the floor caved in. And there is the potential of that, of not winning another game, of not even getting to a bowl game. And what that will do from a brand standpoint moving forward, when you, in the span of a calendar year, the only thing that changed from winning the Natty to not even going to the Motor City Bowl is different coaches now are in charge. And now you're being asked to trust those coaches and give them millions of dollars to pick a roster. That's not an enviable fundraising task at all. And I think if you're Ward Manuel in Michigan, if this continues, you are going to have to ask yourself, is it worth cutting your losses now or taking on a potential another 2 to 3 years of water with this? Because that's the environment we're in, given how much of a failure this has been so far. So I really want him to come out and win that game Saturday. Quiet this all down. At least don't get humiliated against Oregon. Get to a bowl game. Get those 15 extra practices. Have some kind of track record. Hey, the guys could have quit. They didn't opt out. They played. They finished. Culture's still strong. We just got caught with our pants down and out of quarterback, and you're our guy, right? Like Jimmy said to Shea Patterson going into 2018. Because without that, I have no idea what the rationale for bringing him back would be, even after year one.
It's what's alarming, I think, at this point is what you're getting from Jack Tuttle in the last 2 games. I said this to my best friend in the very limited conversation that we had today, because you can imagine I'm not having a lot of conversations right now. But I said, this team would be better off. And this is no disparagement to my friend who's been on this show before. But it would be better with John O'Korn running it, because John O'Korn could at least, he could complete some of the easy passes that Jack Tuttle just completely missed in a game when the receivers finally seemed to figure out how to get separation. And you go back and you rewatch a lot of that game, and it is alarming and it is jarring. And this is why I still advocate, and I want to know what you would do. We'll ask you that here on the other side, but I want to know what you would do, because I would still go back to Alex Orji. And I know I'm getting a lot of pushback from that in the comments from saying that yesterday. They're saying, well, he can't throw. Well, we don't really know. I agree with what Devin Gardner said, because they haven't really asked Alex Orji to throw, but they're so risk averse with him, but yet so open to sling the ball around with guys that love to turn the ball over. And right now, Tuttle, as much as I love him as a guy, he's been the worst of the 3 thus far, because at least you could see Davis Warren had some accuracy, just made some bad decisions, trying to do too much. Alex Orji opened up the offense in ways that allowed the running game to flourish, and all they really needed was for him to basically throw 15 passes and complete about 10 of them, and just to kind of back the defense off, and they haven't had that going for them. So I want to know what you think needs to be done as far as these last 5. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Before we do, hey, NFL fans, season is well underway, and now you can get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So once you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Steve. We got a couple more minutes here, and I'm curious if you are Michigan and you're trying to right the ship, especially when you know you've got pieces. Like, the defense has not been. It's had its moments of being terrible, but ultimately, like, you know, they didn't give up much to a formidable Washington offense. Or at least they stalled them out often. If it wasn't for the turnovers, that game, you know, they only have 17 points or so. This last week, if it wasn't for, again, short fields, they gave up 11 points outside of the 2 turnovers. PFF has the defense as the #1 pass rush in the country still through 7 games. So there's a lot that is still going right there. And it just seems like it's more the back end, which has its moments of looking really good and moments of looking really bad. So we'll continue to leave the defensive side alone, essentially. Offensively, what would you do? Say you get an opportunity to take over it and be the head coach from now on. What changes are you making to this team in an attempt to try to win the next 5 games?
If I were the coach, and this is something you and I have talked about privately all year, I've listened to the Monday Morning Quarterback with Sam Webb and Devin Gardner pretty much every week. They tend to agree with you and me. If I were the coach, I'd have gone with Orji from the beginning. I still have that pass rush. I'm going to play to my strengths. It's also what I think Jimmy would have done if he were here. I'm going to play to my strengths, and I'm fine winning like Iowa. I'm fine doing it because a win is a win. Okay. So, you know, and I play to the strengths I have. I try to play field position. I don't try to worry about turnovers with my defense. I try to develop Orji over the course of time in a pass package that I think I can expand little by little and branch out from there, give my team an identity and a floor. I make him a vibrant part of the running game so that is a number that has to be accounted for in the box every down. That is a potential running situation. I'd have done that from the very beginning. That's what I would have done. It's what I would do now. I will tell you, though, for these coaches, I would not do that. And my answer is indicative of how poorly I think this thing has been mismanaged. Even though I think that is exactly what should be done and what I think Jimmy would also do and would have done from the beginning if he were here. For these coaches, I would not do that. I think it's very clear they don't want to coach Alex Orji. I think they've made that very clear. They did very little of amending the offense to his skill set, very little of it. He's the only guy that got taken out without committing a bunch of turnovers. It's very clear they don't want to coach him. They don't believe in him. That's pretty obvious. And so at this point then, since the narrative really is now about we're installing our system and we're going to coach the team we want, for these guys then, they should put Davis Warren back in and ride it out then. Okay. And they should put on film that they're willing to do this season's done. It's over. They should then put on film that, hey, for recruits, this is the system we want to run. A former walk-on cancer survivor, great human interest story, physically can't do it, but you could. So it's not a question of will. It's a question of can. All right. We will do this, but we can't without a player like you. And it would give them at least something to sell to recruits. Because I think with this staff, I just don't think they want to coach Alex Orji, Isaiah. I think they've made that very clear in how they've acted.
And to me, that in and of itself is malpractice. And it's one of the things that I know we've hammered this home. You and I have hammered it home more than on this show. Right. So
yes,
for the people who think like, man, he just won't stop with this line of discussion. Well, guess what? It's happening behind closed doors as well. Because he hasn't been when in his basically 2.5 game, not even 2.5 game appearances. In the first game, they didn't ask him to do much more than throw horizontal. In the second game, they asked him to throw a little bit more vertical, and he got better as the game went on. Started making his reads and doing the types of things that you expect an actual passer to do instead of just a guy who can throw a football. And then they went out against Washington and acted like, all right, we got Joe Burrow under center, so let's just start slinging it around, and it gets batted down a few times. And they say, all right, well, we're done with this experiment. And look, the Jack Tuttle experiment's working because 3 successive drives and whatever. But the way I look at it is, as I've said this a million times over, is that if you look at Jalen Milroe at the beginning of his tenure as Alabama starting quarterback, he was equally as dismal. You go back to that Texas A&M game that he started in and ended up winning. He was absolutely abysmal in that game. Could not hit the broadside of a barn. Was terrible. The beginning of last year, he was okay to start the year, a little bit better. Still got benched in week 3 and comes back and slowly got to the point where suddenly they started talking about him as being a Heisman candidate. It took time, it took coaching, it took effort, and it took fitting what they have and saying, we're going to make a way for this to work. And it's no different than Devin Gardner talking about Tim Tebow and saying, well, Tim Tebow's not a great runner, but Urban Meyer had the smarts to turn him into a great runner and passer when he was neither of those things. And I agree with you. I think it is a dereliction of duty by the coaching staff. And when you talk about a lot of the, is it Sherrone or whatever, I think that there's another option. And I mentioned this after the game on Saturday to you. The other option is to take a look at your assistants on the offensive side in particular and saying, maybe you don't work here anymore. Steve Kazula has done really well with Colston Loveland, who's taken a big step forward, I think, this year. But outside of him, and I hate saying this because I'm friends with Ron Bellamy, but it's like, what are you getting from these guys right now? Whether it's your quarterbacks, you've got an offensive coordinator who is the quarterback's coach. You've got a wide receivers coach who, unfortunately, when he does get anything going for his wide receivers as the pass game coordinator, there's no quarterback that can get them the ball. Can't even see them, and that's a problem. What would your thoughts be if they said, okay, here's our plan. We're going to go and get the best offensive minds and best offensive staff in the country to support what Sherrone Moore's doing? We've got about a minute left. What are your thoughts in that brief time?
I remember when Garrett Nussmeier was going to, or Doug Nussmeier, sorry, Garrett's a son at LSU. I remember when Doug Nussmeier was that hire for Brady Hoke and was going to save his job, and we hired him away from Alabama, and Kirk Herbstreit raved about it and everything else. And I maybe, but ultimately this falls on the head guy. And he made those evaluations. He chose to say a guy that wasn't good at Old Dominion can be offensive coordinator at Michigan. I mean, he made those kinds of decisions. And so we're really talking then about on-the-job training and managing the program for him. If you're at that point, I'd just go get a coach who can actually has a demonstrated track record of success. I'd rather just do that.
There is one that you can Google. Anyhow. That's going to do it. Again, thanks for Steve. You can find him wherever you get your podcast, Michigan podcast. You can find that. I watch it on YouTube myself, but there have been times where I've listened to it on my way home from Ann Arbor. So you can find it wherever you get your podcast. So thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate you helping me fill in with this, my own dereliction of duty, which is just being able to speak when my job in life is to speak for a living. So thank you very much.
You got it, brother. Get better. God bless.
All right. Thanks. We'll be back on Thursday. We'll talk to you then soon. Peace.